Several decades prior to the present, long before the demon invasion began, the stage was set for the events that would soon unfold. A massive and ominous religious group known as the Heavenly Demon Divine Sect, often referred to as a demonic cult, dominated the shadows. Those who followed the formidable doctrine of the one known as the Heavenly Demon gathered to form a powerful sect, swiftly expanding their influence through sheer, overwhelming force. As the central provinces branded them a heretical cult and unleashed a full-scale assault, an older man, resolute and commanding, his armed followers with unwavering determination. In the chaos of clashing blades and swirling talismans, the greatest war in history erupted, setting the stage for the coming demon invasion and forever marking the world with the scars of the Orthodox demon Great War. Though countless formidable warriors from the world perished in the brutal conflict, the Central Plains ultimately emerged triumphant as the demonic cult fell, and their champions celebrated amid the battlefield, exultant and relieved by their hard-won victory. Many years have passed since the evil cult was eradicated, and peace continues in the world to this day as the streets now bustle with calm and serenity, reflecting the enduring tranquility that has settled over the land. Though many accept this version of events, in truth, the reality diverges sharply from what is commonly believed. In the shadows, the remnants of the demonic cult who survived the Orthodox demon Great War have reorganized as the clandestine demon spirit cult, continuing their secret activities completely unnoticed by the officials of the Central Plains. A furious woman grabbed the man by the collar and, her eyes burning with suspicion, demanded to know what his connection was to the demon spirit cult, leaving him visibly shocked by her accusatory confrontation. Alarmed, the man questioned the inspector's sudden and unexpected behavior, his anxiety evident as he clutched his shirt. In a tense moment, the anxious woman, startled and defensive, pleaded with the aggressive man to release her, promising that she would explain everything if he let go. The woman, regretful and reaching out, apologized to the man for letting her emotions get the better of her, while he turned away, still visibly flustered by the confrontation. With a serious expression, the protagonist redirected the conversation, indicating that there was something even more important to address. Suspicion lingered in the tense corridor as the woman paused, her thoughtful demeanor revealing that she understood Inspector was aware of the secret being discussed. With an air of anticipation, someone called out the name of Instructor, breaking the silence. In the quiet courtyard, the man with the ponytail spoke with resolve, explaining to the attentive woman that the existence of the demon spirit cult was of utmost importance to him. Facing the Instructor with suspicion, the woman pressed him to explain in detail and reveal how he knew about them, while he responded to her interrogation with a confident grin. Turning back with a serious expression, the protagonist assured the inspector that he would explain everything, his tone tense but resolute. Right after it was decided that his assistant instructor position would be publicly revoked, the protagonist stepped forward with determination, bracing himself for the humiliation ahead. Late at night, the protagonist walked pensively outside the academy, reflecting on his ongoing struggle to harness internal energy, while a silent companion moved quietly at his side. In the dimly lit room, the man gravely revealed that he had been kidnapped, prompting the woman to react with stunned disbelief as she echoed his shocking confession. The anxious man, kneeling before the imposing interrogator, confessed that he had been so shocked during the encounter that he couldn't react, but after regaining consciousness, he vividly remembered the person he had faced. An ominous masked man, his eyes glowing with menace, issued a chilling ultimatum as he warned that those who resisted would meet a worthless end, insisting that accepting servitude to the great revival should be seen as an honor. As the woman stared down with wide, unsettling eyes and a menacing aura, she processed the disturbing revelation that someone had called himself a demon scholar. The woman clenched her fist tightly, her anger barely contained as her hand trembled with emotion. Afterward, the protagonist was subjected to a series of cruel experiments, forced to ingest mysterious poisons and endure repeated surgeries that tore apart his organs and flesh, all while shackled and agonized by the insertion of a glowing, centipede-like object into his back. As the man summoned a blazing fireball with unwavering confidence, the woman, caught off guard by the sudden display of power, exclaimed in astonishment at what was unfolding before her. One day, as the protagonist regained consciousness and found himself abandoned and alone in the enemy's hideout, he realized he had awakened the mystical power to wield heaven-true chi instead of ordinary internal energy. With resolute determination, the protagonist demonstrated his mastery over heaven-true chi, remarking with awe that this rare and powerful force was so uncommon that most people did not even know it existed. Enduring the agonizing effects of heaven-true chi, the man realized that possessing such power meant sacrificing his own life force. The man calmly explained to the skeptical woman that, although he had no internal energy, he possessed a mysterious power, and offered to demonstrate it directly to prove his incredible claim. With a grim expression shadowing his face, the protagonist solemnly warned that although his words might seem absurd now, in time there would be no choice but to accept them as truth. Although the existence of heaven-true chi remained in doubt, the woman reflected pensively that the details surrounding the demon spirit cult aligned almost exactly with what she had personally experienced. Her analytical gaze fixed forward as the stoic man stood behind her in silent support. With a sly smile, the calculating man proposed that they could begin uncovering information about her from their side, then suggested she join him if she still doubted his intentions, while the cautious woman listened uncertainly to his manipulative plan. Haunted yet resolute, the woman recalled how she had been kidnapped, tortured, experimented on, and ultimately abandoned in that forsaken place. The confident protagonist, exuding self-assurance, smiled warmly as he extended his hand in an inviting gesture, offering a handshake to signal the start of a new alliance. With a sly, dangerous smirk, the calculating man made an ominous remark, hinting that the journey ahead was long and that they had already endured enough for one day, his menacing tone revealing a veiled threat. With a hesitant yet hopeful resolve, the man proposed that they meet outside the academy the following night, and watched as the determined woman walked away through the open doors, her steps carrying the promise of a secret rendezvous. With unwavering resolve, the calm and determined protagonist stood before the traditional building and assured those before him that he would guide them. The narrative abruptly reveals that the previous claim was a fabrication, exposing the underlying deception. The protagonist reflected pensively in the shadowy courtyard, analyzing his unique power and recalling that he had never encountered the demon spirit cult in his previous life, while considering that his abilities, a form of magic, were entirely unrelated to heaven-true chi. With her back turned and a remorseless air, the woman in the pink dress admitted that everything had been a lie she fabricated solely to manipulate the other person, her confession hanging heavily in the air as she gazed out over the compound. A calculated deception is revealed, crafted solely so that it could be confessed directly. Strapped to a cold laboratory table, the protagonist writhed in agony as monstrous tentacles pierced and restrained him, his tormented screams echoing through the chamber while he endured a horrific transformation. In a shadow-filled laboratory, an imposing authority among monsters questioned the status of their experiment, prompting the analytical scientist to explain that the subject had initially exhibited a clear rejection to the demonic energy. Amidst the eerie glow of containment chambers in the high-tech room, two enigmatic figures analyzed the subject's astonishingly rising tolerance, with one noting how exceptional this progress was even among beings from other dimensions, while the other found it fascinating that, by his own world's standards, the subject was still considered among the weakest. As dark tentacles invaded the helpless old man's body, one figure instructed that the victim should not die immediately and ordered a steady increase in demonic energy exposure, while another coldly acknowledged the command. The white-haired old man crashed violently to the ground, his battered form a testament to utter defeat. Two shocked men rushed toward the frail, unconscious old man, exclaiming in alarm about the demonic attackers and expressing their utter disbelief at the scene before them. With desperation in his voice, the worried man urgently urged the injured, unresponsive protagonist to regain consciousness, as he and the old man struggled to keep him upright between them. The protagonist, racked with agony, struggled to breathe as he violently coughed up blood, his desperate gasps echoing the severity of his injuries. Standing over the bloodied and slumped protagonist, the menacing man confidently threatened that he was certain the protagonist would die today. With a bloodied grin and wild, defiant eyes, the man taunted his opponent by remarking with chilling confidence that it was quite a coincidence, since he too believed his foe would not survive the next move. In the dim, ruined space, a self-assured woman with a bandaged head and missing arm confronted with defiant confidence, remarking mockingly that he still seemed full of life. Pausing outdoors amidst the greenery, the man clasped his hands behind his back and with a curious and contemplative air, murmured thoughtfully as he began to notice something unusual in his surroundings. Standing alone on the sunlit forest path, the protagonist remained deep in thought, his solitary presence highlighting the serene yet lonely atmosphere. Amidst the quiet greenery, the protagonist stood with tense focus, his eyes scanning the area as a sense of alertness settled over him. A man, his stance commanding, loudly demanded that whoever was hiding in the bushes reveal themselves. Outside, the protagonist stands resolutely, gripping a rough stone in his hand as he prepares to take decisive action. Suddenly, the desperate man lunged forward with a furious expression, urgently shouting for everything to stop. As the tension mounted, the panicked man desperately tried to stop the protagonist, but the protagonist calmly explained that he had only pretended to fall for the trap in order to sneak out. In a secluded wooded area, Ghost Shadow Number 7, visibly frustrated and clutching his head, realized with annoyance that only one person had been left to watch over him and lamented his unfortunate circumstances. With a tense determination, the stern man extended a green item toward the unseen recipient, instructing them to take it. As the curious man studied the map and explained its hidden details, he remarked in an intrigued tone that the first page revealed marked locations, while the second offered information crucial for their journey, noting that it appeared to lead to a cave concealed behind a rock wall, as the attentive protagonist listened closely. As the determined young man stepped through the swirling purple portal set into the stone wall, he reminded himself to copy the letters from the second page onto the walls within as part of his mission. The protagonist, his tone urgent and insistent, stopped the serious young man to assure him not to worry about the seemingly nonsensical instructions, but suddenly paused mid-sentence as if realizing something important. A nervous man, sweating and raising his hand hesitantly, questioned whether he was really expected to carry out the task immediately. With a gentle smile and calm confidence, the protagonist affirmed his agreement, radiating contentment in the warm outdoor setting. Reacting in panic, the distraught man questioned aloud why he had been singled out, his shock evident as sweat beaded on his face amidst the forest backdrop. Reacting with a sinister smile, the old man demanded in a menacing tone to know what had just happened, his disbelief barely concealed. As the furious man fled clutching the green scroll, he shouted in desperation that she would regret this by morning, while the amused woman called after him with a taunting grin. The protagonist, looking up thoughtfully as he planned his next move, reasoned that although covering a wide area in a single night might be difficult, ensuring the result was clearly visible to anyone passing by would be sufficient for his purposes. The protagonist, his face etched with uncertainty, pondered aloud what might happen next as he reflected deeply on the uncertain future. Amidst the moonlit temple's serene grandeur, an unseen presence asserted with unwavering confidence that control was entirely within their grasp. The old man, sitting composedly with his fingers interlaced, inquired with a curious tone about the progress of the investigation. An ominous atmosphere settles over the traditional room as a commanding woman, unfazed and mysterious, is introduced as the soul-stealing celestial maiden. The assertive woman insisted that she be addressed simply as, dismissing formal titles as awkward, while the embarrassed man quickly apologized in response to her straightforward request. Inside the traditional room, the authoritative woman, her expression serious and inquisitive, asked how the interrogation was progressing and whether any information had been uncovered about the location that had been mentioned. Walking side by side in the subdued setting, the protagonist regretfully confided to his silent companion that his power felt more like a burden than a blessing, admitting it was never something he had wished for. With tense silence filling the air, the woman's eyes narrowed in focused suspicion as she carefully observed her surroundings. In a formally decorated room, the careful man explained with focus that he needed more time to gather accurate information, while the authoritative woman firmly instructed that the investigation be conducted thoroughly. Sitting indoors with a stern expression, the old man confided that he was certain someone was hiding something, explaining that their recent actions had become increasingly inexplicable. In a tense atmosphere, the pragmatic woman adjusted her sleeve and voiced her wariness by speculating that if he were actually a spy from a dangerous organization, he could become a serious threat to the Orthodox Alliance, adding with indifference that his true allegiance, whether to the Orthodox Alliance or the demonic cult, meant little to her. As the cautious man questioned the woman's intentions, she resolutely explained that she intended to check ahead to ensure the operation would proceed smoothly. Suddenly, a sword is slammed forcefully into the table, leaving the alert old man looking on in nervous shock as tension fills the room. A furious woman aggressively brandished her sword at the uneasy old man, warning that if was found to have a suspicious background or motive, she would not hesitate to kill him on the spot. With unwavering resolve, the protagonist affirmed that, regardless of whether the situation was a lie or a trap, he would not be deterred. Fueled by fury and suspicion, the vengeful woman resolved that if she discovered she had been deceived, she would extract every piece of information from her target before enacting a slow and painful revenge. As the sun rose over the tranquil traditional building at the forest's edge, a calm new day began. The protagonist, radiating determination, sits cross-legged as he channels his inner power and gathers energy, his entire being enveloped in an intense, vibrant purple aura. The protagonist, focused and disciplined, begins by channeling intermediate-tier mana into his body, preparing himself for the next stage of his training. Reflecting on his recent growth, the protagonist considered that although absorbing the highest-grade mana stone had enhanced his abilities, he was frustrated to realize he had only reached the sixth circle level. Assessing his strength with unwavering confidence, the protagonist concluded that he could easily handle any master-level beast within the academy, except for one formidable opponent he deliberately excluded from his calculations. The main issue centers on the lower. The protagonist sat shirtless in deep meditation, quietly assessing that while he could sense a faint trace of inner energy and found no issues with his blood vessels or meridians, he worriedly concluded that neither martial arts nor cultivation techniques could resolve his mysterious ailment. The protagonist lay uncomfortably on the mat, his strange constitution revealed and scrutinized by the astonished examiner, who admitted he had never encountered such a peculiar condition before. Reflecting on the hardships he has endured, the protagonist acknowledged with determination that his unique constitution is the reason he has survived. Despite being nothing more than an ordinary spear user and an external martial artist, the protagonist reflects with resignation that his continued survival as an experiment subject is due solely to his cursed and peculiar constitution. Amidst the ominous silence of the barbed wire-surrounded room, a calm, injured woman stepped forward with quiet confidence, her slight gesture signaling the beginning of a confrontation. The protagonist, his tone laced with suspicion, questioned the other person's intentions by asking if they were performing a fortune-telling ritual. An exasperated man, visibly tired from a sleepless night of preparations, entered the room and complained to the waiting protagonist that he was being forced to handle unnecessary tasks, his frustration clear as he voiced his irritation. In a quiet room, the protagonist pauses in contemplation, his thoughtful gaze revealing a silent intensity as he assesses his next move. Seated cross-legged with an air of authority, the protagonist sternly questioned the standing man, asking if he had been instructed to act, causing the subordinate to appear startled by the reprimand. As the shirtless protagonist sat cross-legged in calm meditation, a confused man appeared at the doorway, interrupting the peace and quietly wondering what was happening. As the furious man charged in, shouting and brandishing his sword, the protagonist remained unfazed, jokingly telling him to calm down before dismissing him with a playful remark that he could leave now. As the tense atmosphere thickened, the protagonist entered the room with quiet resolve, while behind him an angry man charged forward, making it clear there was only one decisive action left to take. Suddenly, a powerful explosion rocks the traditional building, engulfing it in a burst of blinding light and thunderous noise. In a surge of intense energy, the aggressive fighter let out a sharp cry as he struck, while the protagonist, clearly overwhelmed, responded with a pained exclamation as the blow landed. Amid the tense atmosphere, the determined man strains to defend himself as the focused woman launches a powerful attack, all under the composed gaze of their calm instructor observing from the background. Now the protagonist only needs to guide to the carefully prepared cave, planning to have him spread convincing false rumors about the demonic cult's residence as part of his calculated deception. The man confidently revealed the glowing demon barrier covering the cave entrance, while the wary woman watched his demonstration, both aware that to outsiders, the mystical protection would appear as nothing more than sinister sorcery befitting the heirs of the demon cult. With a tense resolve, the young man weighed the impact of revealing vital information about the elusive demon spirit cult, knowing those who received it would be skeptical, yet unable to resist seizing this rare opportunity, while the cautious woman followed a step behind, her wary gaze fixed on his determined stride. In the tense courtyard, the man paused and glanced back warily as the nervous woman approached him with hesitant steps. In the calm morning courtyard, the confident young man greeted the inspector cordially, setting a polite tone for their encounter. With unwavering determination, the woman volunteered herself for the task, making her decision clear to everyone present. With unwavering resolve, the confident woman revealed the location where the demonic cult had established its base. A cunning man with a sly smile carefully outlined his plan to mislead an ally by feeding her false information and intensifying her animosity toward the demon spirit cult, then assured the inspector that he would show the way. Scheming in the shadows, someone plotted to meet outside the academy, confident they could manipulate her as they pleased. Beneath a blood-red sky and the watchful full moon, a foreboding castle rises amid swirling mist, establishing an ominous and sinister atmosphere. The old man, his face streaked with blood, struggled to endure the agony as he groaned and fought against the overwhelming pain. Struggling to breathe, the man gasped desperately as he clutched the glowing orb embedded in his chest, while the injured woman supported him from behind, her face etched with concern. A desperate man, panic etched in his voice, pounded urgently on the wall as he shouted for someone nearby to respond to the emergency. A furious man, his emotions raw and desperate, pounded on the stone wall as he shouted in anger that the situation had grown so dire someone would truly die if it continued. Suddenly, a tense command echoed through the darkness as someone urgently ordered to stop. As the wounded woman knelt beside the dying man, her voice faltered as she admitted in defeat that it was already too late, while the ominous glow of the orb in his chest cast a grim pall over the desperate scene. Against the biting cold, the white-haired protagonist stood resolute, his focused gaze and steady breath revealing a mind deep in contemplation as he prepared himself for what lay ahead. The protagonist's face tightened with determination as he mentally braced himself for the challenge ahead, his focus unwavering amidst the tense atmosphere. Two armored figures, their expressions cold and detached, dragged the blood-soaked, agonized man with the ominous glowing orb embedded in his chest across the floor, filling the grim scene with a sense of shocking brutality. On the cold stone steps, the exhausted woman and the weary man sat in uneasy silence, their anxious gazes occasionally drifting toward the motionless, vulnerable figure of the protagonist lying unconscious in the shadowy foreground. In a dim, oppressive room, the weary woman, her voice heavy with resignation, quietly acknowledged to her exhausted companion that only the two of them remained. Seated side by side in the dim light, the worried man questioned whether they might be the last survivors while the thoughtful woman countered his anxiety by suggesting there could be other holding facilities with more survivors, leaving both caught between hope and uncertainty. Apprehensive yet clinging to hope, the protagonist wondered if survivors still remained somewhere as he surveyed the devastated landscape. Feeling utterly hopeless, the wounded protagonist lamented his fate and bitterly admitted to himself that his life seemed so miserable he wished he had died on the battlefield instead. Seated together in the dimly lit confinement, the protagonist stoically shared that being captured was not a new experience for him, prompting the other man to ask with surprise if such ordeals had occurred even during his time in. With a grim, resigned expression, the protagonist reluctantly revealed that the group was known as the Demon Spirit Cult, adding in a weary tone that explaining further would be pointless since he believed the listener would not understand. In the empty, purple-tinted room, a chilling shadow silently emerges, casting an ominous presence across the cold stone floor. As purple energy glowed between their hands, the woman, her curiosity evident, asked if his ability to absorb star art was a result of the experiments, to which the man, vulnerable yet resolute, confessed that he had never shared this secret with anyone before. Astonished by this revelation, the protagonist reflected that he found it fascinating the ability could affect those monsters as well, admitting to himself that he had never imagined such circumstances existed. In the heavy silence, the protagonist, his hand drooping in defeat, admitted with resignation that his attempt at revenge had ultimately failed, and that he was now giving up. For 10 years, no trace of the demon spirit cult was found, and as the somber woman sat in the darkened room, she confessed with deep regret that she gradually came to realize she had once belonged to an unmatched, powerful group. Sitting side by side on the cold stone steps, the battle-hardened man confided to the weary woman that he had chosen to endure the hardships of war for the future and survival of, his tone heavy with reflection. Shrouded in shadow, the long-haired man with the bandaged forehead smirks with smug confidence, his expression hinting that he feels in control despite his recent ordeal. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes widened in shock as he realized something crucial, his tense expression revealing the gravity of the moment. In the dimly lit, tense room, the atmosphere grew heavier as the two unseen figures exchanged sharp, dismissive remarks, each brushing off the other's words with obvious irritation. Determined to defend from the looming threat of outer monsters, the resolute old leader his group to fight for their future and survival, leading the charge with unwavering urgency. A wounded woman, her arm bandaged and bloodied, sat on the ground and confessed in a hopeless tone that she had grown weary of living, lacked the courage to end her own life, and had only gone to war seeking a place to die. A woman, her spirit nearly broken by exhaustion and despair, admitted that she never imagined she would slowly die in such a place, but the protagonist, unwavering in determination, urged her not to give up. In the dim, battered room, the man and woman, bruised yet composed, acknowledged their dire circumstances, with the woman remarking on the world's end while the man, undeterred, pointed out that they were, at least, still alive. The protagonist, standing bathed in dramatic purple light, resolutely declared that after all he had endured, struggling without the use of his inner energy, he had no intention of dying in a place like this. Amid the suffocating tension, the weary man grimly voiced his hope that if they somehow survived and escaped from the monstrous attackers, while the wounded woman listened anxiously, her worry etched across her face. A confident man, his resolve unwavering, declared with determination that they should take revenge on the demon spirit cult, and assured that he would join as an ally. A curious atmosphere settled over the moment as the protagonist asked if she was starting to feel a bit more helpful, prompting the woman with the bandaged forehead to look up in mild surprise. A woman, her expression twisted into a scornful smirk, mocked her opponent's lack of internal energy, and ridiculed the very idea that someone so powerless could make such a claim. Suddenly, blindingly fast movements blur across a forest path, leaving impact marks on the ground and setting an intense tone for what is to come. Amidst a surge of intense purple energy, the determined man forcefully slammed the defiant protagonist into the ground, their struggle radiating raw power and unyielding resolve. Wrestling with troubling memories that have resurfaced after centuries, the protagonist stands resolute, haunted yet determined to confront the intensity of his past. Contemplating the recent encounter, a calm woman stood indoors making a respectful gesture, her thoughts swirling with uncertainty about whether meeting her directly after returning was the cause of her current feelings. Suppressing any trace of emotion, the protagonist, his face tense with determination, insisted that unnecessary sentimentality could wait. With determined focus, the imposing man set his sights on, recognizing that persuading her was now his top priority. Still unaware of the full extent of the overwhelming force burning within her, begins to unleash this hidden power, one that holds the key to subduing. With unwavering determination, the protagonist made it clear that he would not offer apologies or ask for understanding. Focusing on his mission, the protagonist pressed onward through the forest atop a glowing magic circle, telling himself that he had come too far to let doubts hold him back. In a tranquil forest clearing bathed in sunlight, a woman in a pink dress stands alone, her expression pensive as she quietly contemplates her thoughts. Bathed in sunlight, a calm but watchful woman stands with her arms crossed against a tree, waiting in contemplative silence as she surveys the quiet forest around her. Arriving well before the appointed time, the woman thoughtfully surveyed the sunlit, wooded area, her mind quietly absorbed in observation. As she moved cautiously through the sunlit forest, the vigilant woman reported that despite thoroughly scanning her surroundings, she could find no sign of traps or any unusual traces nearby. A woman, growing increasingly suspicious as she looked down with worried eyes, wondered aloud if someone had caused the mess and questioned whether he might be too much to handle. Behind the prison bars, a terrified woman in tattered clothes recoils on the ground as a menacing, shadowy figure looms over her, their confrontation bathed in an ominous purple light. Meanwhile, as the woman stood alone by the tree, completely unaware, a large, determined man crept silently toward her from behind, heightening the tension in the air. A woman with long, dark hair addressed someone outdoors with a serious tone, remarking that they had arrived quite early and implying there was something important she needed to say. Suddenly, the furious man shouted in surprise as he aggressively confronted the calm, unfazed woman, his anger clashing against her unwavering composure. Suddenly, the woman's eyes widened in shock, her intense gaze revealing a surge of anxiety as she reacted to the unfolding situation. As the young child runs ahead with infectious joy, the woman and man follow at a gentle pace through the snow, their calm and content expressions reflecting the peacefulness of the moment. Amid the swirling snow, the unhinged woman burst into manic laughter, her wild outburst echoing through the cold air. A joyful child ran outside, elatedly expressing how cold it was as she reveled in the falling snow. As the cheerful child dashed gleefully through the falling snow, the man laughed in amusement at the boy's excitement while the woman, with a touch of worry, cautioned him to be careful so he wouldn't get hurt. Suddenly, the protagonist, moving swiftly through the snow, was startled as he discovered something unexpected on the ground. Suddenly, the young woman slipped and fell face first into the snow, crying out in shock and pain. The young girl cried out in pain as she fell to her knees in the snow, while the man standing nearby sternly reminded her that he had already warned her this might happen. Bending down in the falling snow with an insistent tone, the man urged the woman to wake up and insisted she could stand on her own. Suddenly, the woman's eyes widened in shock as she witnessed something completely unexpected. In a tense standoff, the dominant old man glared menacingly at the bound woman in red, who hung suspended and fearful, marking the beginning of a perilous confrontation. Amidst the falling snow, the imposing man stared down his opponent with an intense, threatening presence, his large weapon slung across his back as the tension in the scene reached its peak. As the woman seized the terrified man's face with her glowing, purple energy-charged hand, she demanded in a cold, intense tone to know who he was. With fury burning in his eyes, the vengeful sect leader declared his intent to avenge his fallen brother, holding the soul-taking celestial maiden responsible as he and his men advanced with deadly resolve. Amidst the chaos of roaring flames, a muscular, determined leader confronted a furious attacker who threatened a terrified woman, while the ominous presence of the Black Death sect loomed over the scene. An ominous introduction reveals a notorious sect infamous for robbery, murder, abduction, human trafficking, and every other kind of vile crime. Amidst a sinister air, the shocking revelation emerged that the leader and vice-leader were, in fact, brothers, their imposing stances and menacing presence making the truth all the more unsettling. Realizing his mistake, The protagonist admitted to himself with regret that his carelessness had allowed him to overlook a pursuit that he would normally have caught. A stern, distrustful man confronted the wary woman, accusing her of taking advantage of his brother's vulnerability after hearing rumors about the demonic spirit cult, and implying that her appearance may have lured his brother into harm. In a grim forest clearing strewn with the bodies of fallen men, one of the defeated combatants acknowledged with bitter respect that their opponent's martial arts were unexpectedly formidable, admitting that the cost had been a considerable amount of bloodshed. The intimidating man, clearly annoyed, dismissed the woman's words as a long stream of pointless chatter, leaving her standing warily by the wall. With a cruel glint in her eyes, the intimidating woman leaned forward and taunted the protagonist by asking if he, too, wished to meet the same fate as his dead brother. Locking eyes with unwavering defiance, the woman challenged her pursuer by accusing them of having planned all along to catch her, questioning whether that had been their true intent from the very beginning. A menacing man leaned in with a sinister grin, confidently intimidating his opponent as he remarked that the other clearly understood the situation and added that, had he wanted to kill him, he would have already done so. The menacing man seized the defiant woman by her hair, threatening that he would have killed her on the spot if the rumors had proven false, while she grimaced in pain and struggled to endure his intimidation. With a sinister grin, the aggressive man seized the terrified woman's hair, and leering at her fear, proclaimed that the legends of the soul-taking celestial maiden's beauty were true, and that he intended to indulge in her as if savoring a heavenly pleasure. With a determined glint in his eyes, the man seized the startled old man's neck, and pressing the ornate weapon hilt against him, asserted without hesitation that his actions were entirely intentional. With a menacing glare, the old man raised his sword close to the cornered woman, and threatened that he would begin by severing the hands rumored to absorb inner energy. The brutal leader, gripping his sword and seizing the fearful woman by the hair, threatened with cruel delight that after his subordinates had their way with her, he would methodically strip away her skin before finally ending her life, as his sinister followers closed in around them. With her eyes closed and a bitter expression, the woman gripped her sword and quietly justified her quest for vengeance, admitting that only by achieving it could her brother finally rest in peace, though she acknowledged with resentment that such an act might be too sordid to truly call revenge. Behind cold bars, the desperate woman realized that, despite thinking she had finally uncovered a clue about her enemies, she now faced the terrifying prospect of dying at the hands of those very monsters. The protagonist paused in tense contemplation, eyes closed as he gathered his resolve before finally admitting with hesitation that he needed a moment to think. With a sadistic glint in his eyes, the intimidating man prepared to strike his bound captive, remarking with cold satisfaction that such a fate was only fitting for an assassin blinded by revenge. As the large, intimidating man loomed over the fearful woman with his weapon poised to strike, his gleeful accomplices urged him on, demanding that he begin the attack so they could revel in the violence as well. As a surge of purple energy burst forth from the old man's sword, the protagonist reacted with shock, barely registering the explosive attack as those around him looked on in alarm. In the dim, purple-lit room, the wary woman and the broad, intense man locked eyes, their silent confrontation thick with suspicion and hostility. Amidst the swirling mist, the bloodied protagonist unleashed a surge of ominous purple energy, confronting the armed and tense group as fear and hesitation rippled through his adversaries. Visibly anxious, the woman looked up with alarm and urgently asked if the instructor was in the cell. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes widen in alarm as he reacts to a shocking realization, his tense expression revealing the gravity of the moment. In a frenzied haze, the protagonist, bloodied and overwhelmed by pain, succumbs to an uncontrollable surge of rage as energy crackles fiercely around him. As the furious man launched an aggressive attack with his red glowing weapon, he demanded to know who the calm, unfazed young man surrounded by purple energy was. Reacting with sharp focus, the protagonist unleashed a burst of magical speed, narrowly slipping past the enemy's red-bladed strike. As the protagonist's merciless, energy-charged hand tightened around his throat, the terrified man gasped in panic, struggling desperately against the supernatural force choking him. As the dark-haired protagonist coldly channels purple energy to choke his enemy, the old man gasps and groans in agony, powerless against the crushing force. Amidst the foreboding silence, an unseen presence posed a pivotal question, casting a shadow of tension over the empty panel. The protagonist, consumed by fury, confronted his enemies while crackling blue lightning surged around him, declaring in a vengeful tone that they had nearly wiped out centuries of his existence. The calm but fierce protagonist unleashed a devastating lightning attack, causing his overpowered adversary to scream in agony, and leaving the surrounding onlookers stunned and terrified by the shocking display of power. Suddenly, a piercing scream erupted from off-panel, causing the long-haired man to whip his head around in alarm, his entire body tensing as he tried to grasp the source of the distress. The monstrous, severely wounded figure, shrouded in smoke and electricity, struggled to endure the overwhelming agony, his tormented groans echoing through the ominous silence. Suddenly, one stunned man questioned in shock whether they had just witnessed a lightning bolt, while another, furious and aggressive, yelled at his companions for standing still instead of reacting. With a frenzied cry commanding his followers to kill, the attackers surged toward the calm, pink-clad protagonist, their weapons raised and determination burning in their eyes as he stood unfazed beside the floating, mummified corpse. Amid an ominous atmosphere, the long-haired man radiates menace as he summons dark power, activating a glowing magical circle behind the monstrous figure. In a surge of fierce determination, the protagonist unleashes a powerful supernatural ability, his form glowing with purple energy as he confronts the monstrous figure looming before him. Suddenly, the man, visibly shocked and alarmed, reacted to an unexpected threat by drawing his sword, exclaiming in disbelief as sweat streamed down his face. Suddenly, the panicked man, realizing he was being ambushed from behind, cried out in shock as he desperately wondered where his attacker had vanished. Channeling fierce determination, the protagonist unleashed a devastating magical attack, sending a violent burst of energy outward from his hand. Suddenly, the man is caught off guard as multiple swords streak through the air and strike him violently, leaving shock and devastation in their wake. Suddenly, the ambushed man, overwhelmed and alarmed, stammered in disbelief as the fierce, glowing-eyed protagonist struck him with a powerful purple energy blade. With fury etched across his face, the protagonist unleashed a decisive, blood-spattering sword strike, his glowing blade crackling with intense purple energy. As the tense standoff unfolds, the protagonist, focused and unyielding, stands his ground within a glowing magic circle while an angry mob of armed men charges toward him, their heavy breaths betraying both exertion and hostility. Standing resolutely amid fallen foes, the protagonist channels focused energy through his sword, unleashing the mana blade in a surge of violet magic. One of the panicked men cried out in fear, his companions recoiling and gripping their weapons as terror swept through the group. As the protagonist stood tall and unyielding atop the fallen bodies, a terrified man screamed in panic, while he and the others desperately fled from the overwhelming aura of dominance radiating from their conqueror. As the protagonist unleashed a devastating, glowing sword technique, his terrified opponents screamed in panic while being hurled backward by the overwhelming force of the attack. Suddenly, a surge of purple energy erupts through the scene, violently blasting a terrified man and a panicked woman backward as chaos engulfs the group. As the cold, remorseless woman stood victorious amid the bloodied bodies, one of the terrified men begged in desperation for his life, pleading with her to spare him and crying out in terror for mercy. A woman, stunned and wide-eyed, suddenly recognized someone crucial and, in her shock, muttered to herself that the man before her was that very person. As the long-haired man unleashed a devastating attack with his glowing sword, cutting down multiple opponents in a burst of energy and flames, an onlooker wondered in disbelief if this was truly the man he had been observing over the past few days. Suddenly, the woman was visibly startled, her eyes widening in shock as she reacted to the abrupt turn of events. Suddenly, as a fierce old man launched a hostile surprise attack with his sword, someone urgently shouted a warning for the unsuspecting man in purple to watch out. In a violent surge of fury, the old man launched a lethal attack at the protagonist, shouting that he wanted him dead as red energy crackled around his weapon and his adversary reeled in shock. Suddenly, the old man's face contorted in astonishment as he reacted in utter shock to the unexpected event. In a surge of fury, the old man brandished his sword menacingly at the calm protagonist, threatening him with a wild, intimidating glare. With unwavering determination, the young man's eyes glowed purple as he activated his stone skin ability, transforming part of his body into an impenetrable shield. The old man, his face drenched in sweat and his eyes wide with disbelief, reacted with astonishment as he realized that his opponent was using an enhanced defensive energy technique. Suddenly, the man is struck violently across the face, his expression twisted in shock and pain as he reels from the unexpected brutal blow. With brutal force, the fierce man delivered a devastating, bloody sword strike that sent the defeated old man crashing violently to the ground. The old man, overwhelmed by agony, cried out in pain as he suffered a fatal wound, blood spurting from his mouth and neck before he collapsed backward. Suddenly, the old man, caught off guard and gravely hurt, reacted in stunned shock as he gasped in pain from his critical injury. In a sudden display of dominance, the protagonist activated a powerful magical seal, forcing the helpless woman to the ground as she struggled in vain against the overwhelming restraint. Enraged and his eyes blazing with power, the protagonist unleashed a deadly threat toward his unseen enemy, his fury crackling through the air. As the dominant aggressor unleashed a fierce surge of purple energy downward, his unseen opponent pleaded desperately for mercy, their voice trembling with fear. Shrouded in mist and tension, the protagonist moves with silent determination across the temple rooftop, his focus unwavering as he prepares to infiltrate the ominous building below. Under the cover of night, an ominous glow reveals a smoking crater where something has crashed through the damaged rooftop, hinting at the arrival of an unknown force. Amid the aftermath of the brutal clash, the protagonist stands alone in a blood-soaked crater, radiating unyielding power as his fallen foes lie defeated around him. In the shadowy room, the bloodied protagonist caught his breath after the struggle, his exhaustion evident as he tried to recover his composure. The bloodied young man, his expression set with determination despite the shadows clinging to his profile, prepared to address the unseen presence with tense resolve. Suddenly, the masked woman lunged forward with a knife, her determination evident as the injured man recoiled in shock at the unexpected attack. With a fierce, suspicious glare, the woman demanded to know who stood before her, her voice filled with challenge and uncertainty. As the wounded protagonist struggled to remain standing, he uttered a desperate, drawn-out cry, barely holding on as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. A bloodied yet upbeat man, gripping his sword, greeted Inspector with energetic relief, expressing how grateful he was that she was safe. A cheerful man approached the surprised woman on the empty night street, confidently explaining that he had grown worried when she hadn't appeared at the meeting place and boasting about how useful his tracking skills had been in finding her. With tense determination, the woman drew her sword into a defensive stance, her unwavering focus signaling she was ready to strike. In the dimly lit room, the protagonist stood with a wary gaze, silently assessing the tense atmosphere as he exhaled and remained alert to every shadow. Sensing imminent danger, an anxious realization dawned that the situation had turned critical. In the tense standoff, the bloodied man anxiously admitted to himself that his original plan to control events using pre-regression information had failed, while the determined woman kept him at bay with a knife. Amidst the grim aftermath of the deadly attack, it was realized with shock that there were still those targeting at this point in time. Resolute in her purpose, the woman in the pink dress drew her sword and prepared for confrontation, her thoughts unwavering as she reminded herself that abandoning had never been an option. The reason is clear. In the war against the Demon King, stands as the most vital and irreplaceable force, making this confrontation an intense turning point. Amidst a foreboding atmosphere, the identity of the Demon King is revealed as, sending a chill through the ominous darkness. From the narrator's perspective, the most despair-inducing ability emerges as the armored figure, exuding a menacing aura, prepares to unleash a devastating fiery power. The ominous power shielding the protagonist is revealed to be a nullification barrier that renders any attack meaningless unless it is removed first, making all further preparations futile in its presence. The mysterious atmosphere deepens as it is revealed that only possesses the power to remove the nullification barrier, while the woman stands determined, summoning a swirling purple energy in her hand. She has the ability to absorb the inner energy of whoever she touches, and up until now, she likely believes that is the extent of her power. In truth, the true essence of her ability is to absorb and erase any conceptual power, as the woman's determined hands manipulate a glowing ring of ominous energy that reveals the devastating depth of her power. To reach a level where she can erase barrier in time, a crucial challenge must be overcome. With a sense of urgency burning in his intense gaze, the protagonist realized that she needed to increase her power as quickly as possible. Gripping the ornate golden sword with unwavering determination, the protagonist acknowledged inwardly that the situation had already veered off course, steeling himself for the decisive action ahead. Determined despite his injuries, the protagonist resolved that he would have to subdue the hostile woman by force for now, steeling himself for the confrontation as she threatened him with her dagger. A woman, her face etched with fear, desperately raised her hand to block the incoming sword attack as she pleaded for it to stop. With fierce intensity, the wounded protagonist stood gripping his blood-stained sword and threatened that any movement would result in immediate death. A frightened woman, panic etched on her face as she clutches a bandage around her head, desperately called out for, repeatedly begging for any response in the tense darkness. As the wounded man writhed on the ground in visible agony, he let out pained cries, while the injured woman watched over him with deep concern. The old man writhed in agony, his screams echoing through the air as glowing, crack-like wounds spread across his body, overwhelmed by the unbearable pain of a mysterious transformation. Observing the battered man struggling to remain conscious within the glowing digital frame, the woman anxiously wondered aloud whether he was still holding on. In a sterile, ominous lab, two monstrous figures coldly discussed how the protagonist's body must be on the verge of being torn apart, with one observing his extraordinary mental fortitude while the other confidently asserted that, with such overwhelming mana, no human could possibly endure for long. In the cold shadows of the clinical chamber, the concerned subordinate asked if it was truly acceptable to let the mutant die this way, but the calculating authority dismissed any hesitation, stating with chilling apathy that they no longer cared since all necessary experimental data had already been gathered. Believing that sparing him could turn into a future threat, the ferocious woman insisted it was safer to dispose of him now, her screams of agony echoing as she was struck with brutal force. As the various energies injected into him began to violently clash and reject one another within his body, the man screamed in agony while the anxious woman questioned in horror whether their tormentors truly intended to kill him. As the woman frantically cradled the gravely wounded man, he struggled to utter her name with his last breaths, while she, overwhelmed with emotion, cried out in desperate recognition that it was truly him. A severely wounded man, consumed by desperation, begged the woman to end his life, leaving her frozen in shock and horror at his plea. A woman, her voice trembling with desperation, confessed that she could no longer endure the overwhelming strain as she began to break down emotionally. A furious woman, her emotions boiling over, seized the wounded man by the collar and demanded to know how he could speak that way, reminding him that he had said something different before. Stunned, the woman stared upward in disbelief, as she questioned how their promise to survive together and seek revenge had been broken. Alarmed and struggling to steady the man as his body threatened to break apart, the woman gasped in panic, realizing that his consciousness was slipping away. The old man's body began to break down at an alarming rate, his agonized expression revealing the desperation as cracks appeared and molten light glowed beneath his skin. Desperation hung in the air as the frantic woman cradled the gravely wounded old man, both struggling for breath as she tried desperately to comfort him in his final moments. Beside the tranquil water, the woman focused intently as she unveiled a swirling, purple-glowing energy in her hand, leaving her disheveled companion wide-eyed with shock at the display of mystical power. With a smug glint in his eye, the brazen protagonist taunts his unseen opponent, his confident gesture daring them to respond. In the somber stillness, The protagonist sat silently, his face half-veiled in shadow as he contemplated his burdens with a pensive intensity. With a heavy heart and eyes closed in remorse, the woman lowered her head and apologized too, her voice filled with regret. Stealing his resolve, the protagonist's eyes blazed with determination as he mentally prepared himself for the critical moment ahead. Regaining consciousness, the dazed young man slowly opened his eyes and wondered in confusion where he was, unable to comprehend his unfamiliar surroundings. Staring at his hands in utter disbelief, the protagonist realized with astonishment that the chaotic energies within him had vanished, leaving him overwhelmed by confusion and wonder at this inexplicable transformation. Startled by the unexpected outcome, the white-haired man turned to and questioned what she had done, while she calmly expressed her relief that her actions had succeeded. In a sudden, chilling close-up, the wild-eyed woman with blood at the corner of her mouth glares intensely, her deranged expression radiating madness and tension throughout the scene. Sitting battered on the floor and radiating an eerie purple glow, the woman confessed with a sly, defiant smile that she had not been certain her risky attempt would succeed. A furious man confronted his opponent, shouting angrily as his rage boiled over in the tense standoff. After a desperate struggle, the protagonist, his voice strained and protective despite his injuries, urgently warned the wounded woman to remain still, emphasizing how close she had come to death as she collapsed, exhausted, against the wall with glowing bandages on her injured feet. After realizing that her ability worked on those monsters, the woman reflected with awe that she could absorb far more than she had ever imagined. Struggling to contain the alien energy, the protagonist reflected with distress that, although he had managed to absorb it, its strangeness prevented him from erasing it. As the overwhelmed woman broke down in despair, she lamented whether things might have turned out differently had she realized sooner, prompting the startled man to exclaim in alarm that this was hardly the time for such talk. Amidst the ominous atmosphere, a man delivered a grave warning that was about to die, desperately questioning why was involved, while received the accusation with a calm and serene demeanor. Collapsing to the ground as purple light and petals swirl around him, the old man, overwhelmed by despair, desperately questioned why anyone would make such a sacrifice for his sake. With a determined glint in her eye and blood still staining her lips, the wounded woman explained that she was recalling crucial information because of something she had been told before. As the woman with bandaged arms sits pensively on the floor beside the relaxed, confident man, he encourages her not to give up and reminds her that a real man keeps his word, reaffirming his resolute commitment. In a moment of agonized desperation, the protagonist leaned forward, confessing that his earlier harsh words were meant solely to keep the other person alive. Sitting injured and alone against the wall, the woman reflected with deep regret that she had never wished for things to turn out this way. In the ominous darkness, the mysterious old man stood with his back exposed, his muscular frame tensed in resolute anticipation as he prepared for the looming confrontation. Amidst the swirling embers fading into darkness, an unspoken plea for survival lingers in the somber air. With a bittersweet, resigned smile despite her grievous wounds, the woman uttered her final wish that he survive, and from time to time, remember that there once existed a foolish woman like her. Amidst the oppressive darkness, an unseen voice ominously hinted that there was one final, crucial revelation yet to come. Amid the thick tension, the wounded but resolute protagonist faces the wary woman, both their weapons drawn as determination clashes with apprehension in a silent standoff. Breathing heavily in the dim light, the bloodied protagonist struggled to catch his breath, his exhaustion evident after the fierce confrontation. As sharp projectiles slash through the air toward her, the woman in the long red dress instinctively flinches and braces herself, her posture tense and startled as she reacts defensively to the sudden attack. Despite his blood-stained appearance, the protagonist maintained a calm demeanor as he assured the other person that he had no intention of causing harm, hoping to ease the tension in the air. A suspicious woman, gripping her sword defensively, demanded to know how her interlocutor had discovered she was being held there, making it clear she was not ready to trust so easily. Meanwhile, the man, visibly confused and skeptical, questioned whether the protagonist's strange energy techniques could even be considered martial arts, refusing to accept the explanation behind the powerful display unfolding before him. In the dimly lit room, the protagonist, his suspicion evident, confronted the unseen figure and accused them of lying about the demonic spirit cult. A furious woman confronted her target with a knife and demanded to know the truth about their real identity. In the dimly lit room, the protagonist, his expression burdened and secretive, quietly admitted with resignation that even if he revealed the truth now, it would not be believed. A determined woman, gripping the hilt of her sword, stated that instead of addressing the current situation directly, she would explain what she could do to help, leaving her listener shocked by her unexpected offer. With a commanding presence, the old man raised a single finger before the traditional window, signaling that he was about to begin his instructions. With blood streaming down his face and resolve burning in his eyes, the protagonist vowed that he would help take revenge on the demonic spirit cult, undeterred by the menacing figures lurking in the mist behind him. The woman, visibly shocked and tense as she gripped her short blade, reacted in disbelief when she was told that her martial arts and absorption skills would be made far stronger than before. Standing firmly before the woman and the fallen foes, the man made a determined vow that he would take full responsibility for protecting her from any threat, just as he had moments before. In the dimly lit room, the wounded but resolute old man extended his battered hand, and with determination, stated that he had only one request in exchange. The bloodied protagonist, his determination unwavering despite his wounds, delivered an ultimatum by firmly stating that his only condition was for the other to remain in the Dragon Spring Academy and stay by his side. At that moment, a determined woman herself for battle, her eyes fixed ahead as she drew a glowing blade with unwavering resolve.